Let's talk about indie makeup shimmer textures. Happy Multichrome Monday. Today's video is going to be all about my single eyeshadows from different brands, and we're going to really deep dive into all the different textures that are available between the brands, and I'm going to be doing lots and lots of swatches to get you an idea on just how these textures really are. Even though you can't obviously see them in person and touch them, you might be familiar with some of them, so maybe that will be also helpful. So let's jump right into it. We have a lot to get through. I'm just gonna go by brand in no particular order. So first I want to talk about black based or jeweled multichromes, because more or less they have pretty much the same texture in terms of being very smooth. There are different levels of just metallic and shine to them. There are some that are just shinier, but they still all look very smooth. So I'm just going to be swatching random shadows. I do have dedicated videos within each brand, so just check out a playlist if you're interested in specific collections. I have lots and lots of comparison swatches already up, so I will put down all the playlists that are relevant. So this one right here is Davina, so you can see very smooth. And then a Terra Moon shadow, very smooth and shiny and shifty. And then a Clionadh shadow, again, very shiny. If anything, it's actually more shiny than the Touch of Glam Beauty. Lethal Cosmetics, which these are not very shiny, but they do look smooth. And then lastly, I'm going to swatch one of the, on my thumb, one of the Odin's Eye, also not very shiny. So I'm just going to zoom you in so you can see just the texture. So I feel like you can kind of tell this one just has a bit more sparkle to it, but it doesn't necessarily have texture. And then this is the Lethal Cosmetics, also very smooth. So more or less these are all pretty much the same. And then this is Shellwe, and this is a Terra Moon's black base shadow. Though the Shellwe overall a little bit lighter base, they're not necessarily completely jeweled, but you can see very smooth. So more or less these are always consistent. I really haven't seen too many super flaky kind of black base multichromes. So now I'm going to talk about some of the textures in the Odin's Eye single eyeshadows. I have a dedicated video on these, and these are not all the shades that are available, but I think this is a good spectrum of showing you the different textures that they have. I'm going to be pulling out some shades here and there just to be able to kind of compare them at the end between all the different brands. I also just painted my nails, so I got a little bit on my skin, so excuse that. So I think you can kind of already see the textures that are going on here just in the pan, which usually is a very telling sign, so definitely something to pay attention to before you buy an eyeshadow. So you can really see that the black base multichromes here are very smooth, and then we've got a little bit of texture going on here with this shade, and then some of these other shades, and then again we have some smoothness with these shades. But let me just swatch again. So this is got lots of smoothness. We've got a little bit of texture that smooths out. Also, it has a different finish. It's got a very light base, so great for layering. And then this shade over here also has a little bit of texture, so you can kind of, so there's a smooth, there's a little bit more texture, and then a little bit more flaky kind of texture, but it does smooth out, but it has an extra sparkle in it as well, as you can see there. And then I'm going to smooth this one out as well. So there's definitely a little bit of a difference going on there. And then I'm going to swatch this one versus this one. And they do look very smooth, but this one has like a little bit more textural look to it in the pan, but they do smooth out and they do feel just a little bit wet. They have definitely a little bit more of a creamier texture to them, while the black based ones are just very smooth feeling. They just feel kind of like, I don't know, not quite silky, but they do just feel like very smooth, but not wet. Onto these two empty palettes, which house my Lethal Cosmetics, Glamshop, glaminatrix, more Glamshop, and burnovich as well. And you can already see the differences in so much different texture. Now, some of these look like they might be a little bit more opaque than others, but some of them actually end up very sheer. Some of them pick up a little flakier than others. So for example, Lethal Cosmetics for the most part has very smooth multichromes, but they do have also some that have just a little bit more substance to them in terms of their sparkle. I think this shade is called Parsec, and it's got just a little bit more powderiness to it compared to, for example, this shade right here, which has a lot of smoothness to it. And here I'm just zoomed in so you can get a better feel for the different texture. And then they have recently come out with some other single shadows as well, and they definitely have quite a bit of texture to them, specifically these neutral kind of shades. So I'm just lightly rubbing my finger in them, and you can kind of see how this picks up way more, like almost chunky, but like not in a flaky way. So usually with these kinds of formulas, I definitely opt for some sort of a primer underneath that will really help these stick down, because I do get fallout with something a little bit piecier like this. But with something like this, I just use water or just apply with my finger. I usually don't have any issues with that. And then they also came out with these shades, which I do have dedicated videos on, and it also has a bit of texture to it, while some of these other shades are quite smooth. I'm I'm running out of fingers here. So this is more powdery. This is more powdery smooth, while this one's more of like a sparkly, but it does completely smooth out. So when I go like this and I apply some pressure, it just looks so, so beautiful regardless. And I mean, same with this one, which is kind of why I really prefer to use these kinds of shades with my finger, because I can control that pressure. And you can just see how many flecks are throughout this, which is I think what makes it so, so sparkly. Onto some of these other textures. So these are some single shadows from Sugar Drizzle that I depotted from, they came in compacts. And you can also see the textural difference between something like this and something like this. So I'm going to swatch this one and then I'm going to swatch that one. And we're going to take a closer peek. Again, just a little bit more texture here and a very, very smooth with this one. But again, this one just looks so, so extra sparkly and shiny and really, really smooths out. Then we have these shades from Glaminatrix, and as you can tell by just the way they look in the pan, they definitely have less smoothness to them and a little bit more of like a flaky texture. So I just tapped my finger in there, and you can see how it picks up just a little bit more kind of piecey, but not necessarily like too flaky. And we'll get into some of the flakier textures in some of these other brands. And then I'm just gonna swatch another one. It has a little bit of waxiness to it, which is what also helps it really smooth out. Again, I'm applying just a little bit of pressure, and they do smooth out, and they just have like an extra glisten to them. I feel like there's something about this nature of this kind of pigment that just allows it to be extra sparkly, while the smooth pigments, they're just like metallic, but not necessarily sparkly. Like you need a little bit of that texture to really get them to be extra, extra sparkly. And then from Glamshop, they have these hollow shades, and these feel very thick and almost waxy. And they do have quite a bit of texture to them as well, but they do smooth out. So that's how that picks up, but it does, again, smooth out, and it's just this beautiful hollow. The camera keeps focusing on the single shadows behind it, but it does very much smooth out. But sometimes, because there's a little bit of that texture to these shadows, they are a little bit harder to pick up with a brush. They are almost kind of flaky in the pan, so they kind of pick up in chunks versus a uniform coating on the bristles. So burnovich definitely has a couple of different textures in there, and so does Glamshop. So usually the Turbo Glows from Glamshop are the really, really beautiful topper-like sparkly shades. And then I don't remember what exactly the ones, okay, so these are the Glamshop, and then so some of these are, I believe this is Glamshop too, actually. So it actually doesn't belong in here, it should be over here. But there's also the burnovich, yeah, so this one is a burnovich shadow. So it picks up very smooth, but do you see how it kind of picked up a little bit, almost like powdery and slight texture to it? Now this one will pick up nicely with a brush. And then there are these shadows, which are very similar in texture to the glaminatrix shades, and they do pick up more or less the same. It seems like it's the same kind of pigment. And this kind of formula does tend to pick up a little bit thicker on the finger. So if you can see, like there's quite a bit of a coating on my finger now. So it will really swatch for days, and I can just kind of blend it down my finger, and there's plenty of product to go around. So with these kinds of shades, I try to be careful with how much I pick up, because they will look textured on the lid if you put too much of these on. And then let me smooth this one out. And there's also this texture from Glamshop, which has lots of sparkle. It's very sheer and topper-like. You can kind of see it's got like a little bit of pieciness to it, the way it picks up, and I'm just gonna smooth that out. But it retains the sparkle even when it's smoothed out. And this one just feels, when you touch it compared to like when I spread this one out, for example, over here, the thicker one, this feels more like silky smooth. Like I can feel that the particle size is much smaller than this one, but obviously there's also probably different kind of binder levels going on, because this one feels, again, a little bit drier, while this one feels a little bit more thicker. There's just a little bit more like almost tug. And then there's also some smoother textures. So this one is a Glamshop shade. It's not very shiny. It's very smooth, very satin-like. And then this one over here, again, you can kind of see still very shiny, very smooth, but a little bit dry. Kind of picks up with a little bit of extra particles to it. And this one is very similar to something like this from burnovich, which also picks up very much the same to that one. So these are very, very similar. I do feel like the Glamshop one felt a little bit drier than this one from burnovich. And then burnovich also has this topper-like formula to it. Do you see how on the edges you can really see the particle size? And this one picks up really great on the brush and really smooths out and just looks really wet. Moving on to some more Shellwe makeup single eyeshadows. These are the non-black based multichromes, and these do have some varying textures. And again, you can kind of tell in the pan, so a little bit more texture here, here, and here, and then very much a lot of smoothness here. I would say these two are quite smooth as well, with these having a little bit more texture, but let me just show them to you so you can see so much smoothness going on here. And then if I just kind of go like this and tap it, still smooth, much more shiny, but it does feel a bit less dry and a little bit more waxy. And then so does this yellow right here. And again, I do have a dedicated video on this collection. And then this one, I think I picked up actually too much. This one picks up a little bit chunky as well and picks up pretty easily, but again, smooths out so, so nicely. And then this one, again, it's a little bit thick, so it actually takes a little bit more pressure to blend that one out. And then this one as well. So these two are very similar, but they do smooth out. They just have a little bit of extra texture to them. And then this one smooths out very nicely, very sheen-like. Next, let's get into Davina. For the most part, I would say they have a very specific kind of formula. It's very piecey, very sparkly, and I think it's really easy to spot a Davina shadow because they just have a look, not only the specific imprint of the lines, which I absolutely love. They always look so perfect when they're brand new, but also they just really glisten. They have just a little bit of texture to them, the way they look in the pan, but they are very, very smooth and they're just still sparkly. So for example, this is like a darker shade. So you can see it's got a little bit of pieciness, and I am going to be showing you a close-up. And then there's some that are a little bit flaky. So for example, this one right here, I'm trying to really get you an idea on how these kind of pick up. And then this shade in particular, I forget which collection it is from, but it is Cream Puff Cuddles. This one feels definitely more smooth. So here's just a close-up so you can really see how they pick up. You see the extra sparkle going on here, while there's a little bit more powderiness to this shade, but still lots of sparkle. I really do think that the Davina formula is just so unique to them, and they do smooth out very, very, very nicely. As you can see, super, super shiny. And these are quite a bit sheer. Now they also have a very smooth formula, which are these specific ones like Verdant Frost, part of this collection. So these compared to the others are very obvious. These are more like some of the other very, very smooth, almost like drier shimmer shadows from other brands. And then same with this one right here. Very, very powdery and a little bit dry feeling. And then there's also these ones from this collection where Nocturne Ash was, which is pretty smooth and very, very shiny. I would say this one is pretty uncommon to see with Davina shadows. I don't know why I can't remember this collection, because I remember talking about it all the time when I got these. And these are very smooth, very beautiful, very sparkly, still a little bit on the powdery side. They don't have any tug, or they don't feel like thicker or waxier. They feel like they have a really great amount of binder in them. So they don't feel like they drag on the skin a little bit like some of the thicker formulas that just feel like they have a little bit extra binder in them. So here are all the differences. I think if anything, these two are a little bit more similar to each other. This one's very smooth, but this one just has that extra kind of pieciness to it. And these do all smooth out, like especially these ones, where you will not see any sort of skin texture accentuation with any of these. And even the ones that I was just showing previous to this one, none of them accentuate any skin texture. They don't really pick up necessarily thicker, shiny, sparkly on the lid. And Davina does recommend on their website to use some sort of a tacky glitter primer when you're using their eyeshadow specifically. I definitely don't think you need it for something like this. the smoother texture, that the very first one I kind of swatched in this palette. And they also have these kind of neutral, non-multichrome single shades, which are so stunning. They are a bit flaky and they can apply a little bit thick. They have a little bit more thickness to them when you swatch them. However, this shade Moonlit is just different. Even though they're kind of part of the same collection, it's just different. It's just so absolutely beautiful and reflective. So let me swatch this one versus like one of these other ones. Again, just like tapping, just trying to tap in them so you can see the textural difference. So these do have a bit of flakiness to them, which is what I mean when I say if you apply too thick of a layer of these, they will accentuate skin texture possibly, especially over some sort of a glitter primer. And a little goes a long way, so I would really recommend trying to use as little as possible. I really like to use flakier shades with my fingers because I really feel like I can just really smooth them out versus with a brush, just the texture that they are in the pan. So if they're flaky, they will pick up flaky and they will probably give you a bit of fallout. I feel like the least amount of fallout I get is when I use my fingers, but I understand not everyone likes to apply eyeshadow with their fingers. So something I like to do when I apply flakier shadows on the lid, so I'm just gonna use like a random one from this collection. So I like to pull my finger down into the shadow and then kind of rub it against the edge of the pan so you can kind of see whatever remnant is there. And this way I don't apply too much. And do you see the difference in how that looks now on the finger? It's already smoothed out. So you're gonna be applying something already smoothed out versus like this. So, but then at the end of the day, you're gonna get second time and you can still see a little bit of the flakiness going on. So it's like you're trying to smooth it out once it's already on the lid versus like it's already smoothed out quite a bit before going on the lid. So it just makes the application a bit easier. And I do know not everyone likes this kind of formula. Not everyone wants to deal with this kind of formula. On a scale of like how easy a shimmer shadow is to use, it's definitely a little bit higher up there. It's not as hard as some of the really flaky pressed shades. And then Moonlit does just swatch so sparkly and so smooth and shiny. Like it just glistens, especially when it's even out of focus. Actually, let me put it back out of focus. Here's how they sparkle. So beautiful. I love these shades from Davina. And then here are some other shades from Davina. So these are the newer collections, and I definitely feel like specifically these ones right here that are part of the, I think it's the Mystic Cove. So they're the multichromes, and they just have a newer formula, in my opinion. I'm not sure if this is true, to Davina, because they feel absolutely exquisite. They look so beautiful on the lid. They look very smooth, but they are a little bit on the flaky side. So these right here are a bit more on par with some of the other textures from Davina that we know. So you can see while it is smooth, it's got a little bit of texture to it. And then this one as well. But then if I swatch one of these, it picks up pretty thick in terms of when you touch the pan as well as when you smooth it out. You can just feel a little bit of a difference between the shades because this one feels more on the dry side and then this one just feels like it has a little bit of extra kind of, I don't want to say oil because it's not necessarily true. It's a bit more emollient. And then I'm just going to swatch another one so I can really show you the textures. This one really will show you how different they are. So you can see this one is still a little bit powdery. They do pick up a little bit flaky, but nothing like this. And these do also pick up thick. So similarly to the glaminatrix shades as well as the Glamshop shades that are kind of similar to these. And I did do swatch comparisons between those and some of these shades in here so you can kind of really get an idea on how they look and how they look swatch. And I'm just gonna smooth these out so you can kind of see how that smooths out. And then this one just goes for days. And this is that kind of formula that feels like you can pick up easily too much, and definitely a formula I prefer to use with my finger. This one sheared out quite a bit and I had actually some flakes kind of fall down. And then this one smooths out so shiny. And then the other shades, of course, we have to talk about are the iridescent shades from Davina. There's definitely, I would say, about 3 different formulas going on between all the different shades. So for example, Nokomis is very smooth. You can even see that in the pan. And then we've got a bit more flakiness, like Proteus. Again, like the difference between them in the pan is pretty significant. I would say this one is the flakiest one. Then they also have this formula. It's very smooth, but it's also kind of flaky and very piecey. So that is something like this. So here they are just face up to show you the different textures. So we've got very smooth. a little bit kind of piecey, a little bit drier, and then kind of flaky. I feel like this one picked up a little bit flakier than I was expecting, so I'm actually going to pull the shade Cake Bomb as well, because that one is also very much on the dry side, but picks up very smooth, but again, has a little bit of like a powderiness to it. And here they are close up. You can see how smooth, a little bit more textured, super textured, and then just kind of very piecey and powdery. Okay, I moved the shades behind it so it would stop focusing on those, but you can see the differences. So I'm just gonna smooth this one out even further, see how that looks. This one also smooths out, but it's sparkly. So this one is sparkly versus this one is just shiny. And then smoothing this one out, you can see there's some flakes kind of dropping off. You can see the big chunk here. And again, this one is something that you want to go in with a light hand. When I do use this shade, I like to do the kind of hack off the side of the pan. And then this one is the sparkly shade. Got a little bit of fallout, but you can see like it's different. It's got tons of sparkle. So I feel like these three have quite a bit of sparkle to them, like not necessarily see too much of a difference. But this one is definitely very smooth, even just in the finish after it is smoothed out. And since we're already in this palette, I'm going to talk about some of the iridescent textures from Terra Moons. Now they have also a very, very smooth formula, a little bit more of a flaky formula, a very smooth but metallic formula, and then like a piecey formula. So there is definitely a bit to choose from. So for example, here is Saturn's Rings, very, very smooth. Then there is Atlas, which has that extra pieciness to it, a little bit more texture to it. And then lastly is the shade Sublunar. Very, very, very flaky. See how that picked up? So, and then here's what they kind of look like all next to each other. So different formulas. You can really tell easily just by the way they look in the pan which formula is kind of which. And I think it's always very helpful to see some close-ups of the eyeshadow pans so that you can really get an idea on what the textures are, what you're getting into. So here's the smooth one. Then there is this one's a little bit more piecey. It's smoothing out, but I have a little bit of fallout with this one. And then last up is this one, which takes a little bit of extra kind of pressure to really smooth it out. Very, very sparkly. I do think if anything, this one looks a little bit extra glitzy than the slightly less flaky shade. But this one definitely does feel like a bit textured. This one is going to pick up on the brush, very textured, and it's going to make it very easy to get fallout. So the least amount of fallout you'll get is from this shade and then this shade and then this shade, but definitely recommend like this kind of particle size, and this one probably would recommend some sort of a tacky primer just to ensure like this sticks down and doesn't move, especially if you have hooded lids like I do. So staying with Terra Moons, they also have these kinds of shadows. So they definitely have about 4 or 5 different textures in their single shadows. So this one is very, very flaky type too. And this is the shade Dark Side. Then they also have this very sparkly but also flaky shade. And this one is the shade Carbon. And then they have this really beautiful, super smooth formula like this that is just so metallic. It looks literally wet. It is so smooth. It is such a pleasure to work with. No skin texture accentuation whatsoever for sure. And this is such a beautiful formula. I really hope that they come out with more and more shades that are more like this, especially multichromes, because it is definitely my preferred kind of formula from them, which is obviously very much based on just like my preference in general. So it might not be the case for everyone. I'm sure there's people that prefer this kind of formula over here, but just here's what that looks like. And then I'm just gonna go into some other palettes to show you some other textures they have. So specifically they have this one, this is PC. So this one I would say is similar to the shade that we were talking about, the Atlas shade, in terms of how it picks up. It's got a little bit more oomph, a little bit more powderiness to it, but it's not flaky. It's just the particles are a little bit on a scale of flakiness. They're definitely like the less flaky side, especially compared to some of these other shades. So let me just kind of smooth these out so we can get an idea of just how they smooth out. You can already see on my finger too, there's a lot coming off of this one. And this one also, because it's so flaky, it kind of looks a little bit patchy, especially on kind of the angle I'm looking at it with. Hopefully you can kind of see it here. You can just really see my skin tone through it. So that's why I would definitely recommend these two with some sort of a glitter primer. And then I'm just going to smooth out this one. Oh my gosh, it just swatches for days. I mean, I could do my whole hand with just this shade. Look at that. And so you can see how different the finishes are. And then this one as well. This one just has a lot of sparkle and a bit more sheerness. So obviously there's also different kind of finishes, but you can really see the different textures here. So I wasn't recording, but I swatched these Terra shades. So these are some other ones they have. They have a more almost satin-like, but still quite shiny formula that's very smooth. They have slightly up from that, a very smooth, shinier formula with a bit more sparkle to it. And this one also is kind of similar to this one where it's got quite a bit of shine to it. Very smooth, but a little bit on the drier side. And then they have this really flaky formula. This is not actually even the flakiest one, but this one specifically is called Butterfly Nebula. So here's the different textures over here, so you can really see. And then if I smooth this out, first of all, I have kind of like fallout all over. Definitely need a little bit at a time. This one will not pick up that great, even with a toothier kind of flat brush. This one will smooth out. This one will pick up beautifully with a brush. Definitely recommend using with a brush. You can, of course, use any of these with a finger, which is usually my preference anyway. So here's what they look like smoothed out. So I would say in kind of terms of formula, this one is probably the least shiny. Then these two are shinier. And then this one is the shiniest and but also sparkliest. So here are some other formulas. They have this one. I don't think I've seen them come out with anything similar to this. It's like an iridescent. It's very, very smooth, but it's pretty dry and it's not very shiny. It's like a step below a satin, so it's not quite a matte, but I wouldn't say it's like quite a bit of like a shiny satin. Like it's definitely least shiny than the other satin I was showing you previously. And then they have these super extremely flaky shades that are definitely a little bit harder to work with. And here's what that one picks up. You can see the flakiness, and they have these really beautiful, almost like a PC texture. It's just so sparkly, a little bit flaky, but smooths out very easily. So this one is the shade Solar Delirium, and then they also have this one right here, which is very, very shiny and sparkly. So similar to the other shade, the Aphelion shade, which I don't remember if I was recording, but this one is very similar to the Davina kind of formula in terms of just, it's got that sparkle, but it's got a smoothness to it. I'm just gonna smooth these out again so we can get an idea. You can see this one. Let me take the shadows from the background out because my camera just will not focus correctly. So this one took a bit of pressure and a bit more time to smooth out, while some of these other ones are, look at how sparkly, so beautiful. Love this kind of formula from them for sure. Much prefer it to the flaky shades, but I do think that there's a kind of like a time and a place for the flaky shades. But they're not my favorite to use for sure. It's not really like I'm going to work, I'm trying to throw on some multichromes kind of shade. You can see the different levels of shine and sparkle. The other formula I wanted to show you, so this one is not a multichrome, it's just like a regular shade, but it's more of a satin, but it's got a lot of vibrancy to it, a lot of smoothness, but definitely more of a satin-like finish. And this one feels a little bit waxy. Like, it's very interesting because it is so smooth that there's absolutely no kick up with this one at all. Even when you pick it up, there's no powderiness to it, and when I smooth it out, it just feels like there's a little bit like of a tug to it. I think that's kind of the last kind of texture from Terra Moons, and I have so many, but we're not gonna go through this whole other palette because they're honestly all varying textures that are already the ones that I showed you. So onto ShineBySD. First and foremost, I think that they have their own unique texture and feeling of their shadows. Definitely a very unique formula. They are a bit drier feeling. And in my opinion, it is very noticeable. And even though they have different textures, they have the base level of being on the drier side very much in common, which is not a bad thing. If anything, it's actually really good for anyone with hooded oily lids such as myself. I don't think I've ever had their shadow crease on me with or without primer. Like, I actually really have been enjoying their drier formula because it just does mesh well with my lids. Now they have some flakier formulas, they have some smoother formulas, some more satin formulas, so they are quite a bit of like an experience in themselves, and they almost feel like when you touch them you can kind of hear just how dry they are, like you're rubbing something hollow. I don't know if that makes any sense, but I feel like if you have tried ShineBySD, you know exactly what I'm talking about. So first up are these, which I actually should have included with the black base multichromes, but theirs definitely have a very specific drier texture to them, and they are very metallic, and I mean, look how shiny and look how smooth, absolutely beautiful. So these are Pretty much like all of them are this kind of really nice, smooth, shiny, metallic formula. And then they have a more piecey formula. So specifically something like this, which is the shade Shine Bright. And I think ShineBySD is actually one of the only brands I don't really have dedicated videos on. I feel like I just was like kind of buying things here and there, and then I was getting some things in PR, and then I just feel like I have so many bits and pieces of their collection that I haven't really been sure how to approach doing a video on ShineBySD. But you can really already start to see, obviously the base is different because this one is very dark and this one has more of a sheer base, but when I zoom in you'll especially be able to tell. Then they also have a very smooth formula, so this is kind of like an iridescent multichrome, very smooth, very dry. This is Radar, absolute stunner. Riley Seeking Shifts recommended this one, and I had to get it because it is so beautiful, so shiny, really magical. Then they also have a flakier formula. So for example, this shade right here, which is called Obsession. So this one has a little bit more grit to it, but it is so sparkly, but again, a little bit on the flakier side. I don't know if I have anything particularly like really flaky from them, but they do definitely have that kind of formula. They also have a very smooth formula like this one right here, which is similar to the gray base multichromes from Terra Moons and the deep iridescent multichromes from Clionadh. Very similar in texture for sure. Lots of shine and very smooth. So here's what that one looks like. And I'm just going to show you these up close. I already started smoothing this one out because I forgot to do the close in. So here you can see texturally how different these are. I think these two have a little bit of similarity, but you can see the kind of separate sparkles mixed into this kind of shade. And here's what that looks like smoothed out. Really see a lot of that sparkle coming through. And then this one is very smooth. Kind of the drier formula. This one's a little bit of a flakier formula, very sparkly. And here's what they all look like together, smooth out. Another formula they have, I feel like this one's relatively new. It is a little bit similar to the yellow that I swatch, but this is Ice Blink from the Earthborn collection in collaboration with Riley. And this one has just a lot of pieciness to it, a lot of flex throughout it, and looks very smooth, gives a very wet effect look. And just, I mean, look at that sparkle. So beautiful. I love this shade. Like, if you're going to get one shade from ShineBySD, absolutely 100% recommend this one. And then also So Sweet has a little bit of flakiness to it, but it actually picks up really nicely. A little bit thick, but it smooths out completely. So it actually smooths out to look like the way, for example, Radar, like that iridescent drier type of formula. Here you can see the difference in the texture. Still smooth, but it's like a different kind of smoothness. It's less of like a sheeny kind of sparkle shine and metallic. It's more of like a sparkle, like pieces of sparkle. I would say their most typical kind of formula is this really beautiful, shiny, smooth formula. And they have definitely, if you love purple, check out ShineBySD. They have so many variations and tones of purples. This one is Glam Rush. Then they also have, this one is stunning, Temperature Arising. Looks absolutely beautiful as well. Very smooth, very shiny. If anything, this one might have a little bit more texture to it. And then another one that has a little bit more texture is Takeover. This one is definitely more like a sparkly kind of smooth, but very similar. Again, all very dry feeling, but like in a good way. Like, I mean, even though they feel drier, look how shiny and beautiful they are. And I love these kinds of shades. I love having all these purples from them. And then another smooth one, this one I would say is more like a satin, and this is the shade Haughty. It's still really beautiful. It's got almost like a sheen to it, but it's not as shiny for sure as the others, especially like Radar, for example, next to it. I feel like you can see Radar just has more sparkle to it. There's also Perfect Match, which even you can just tell in the pan compared to like one of their smooth shades. It's just got like, it picks up very piecey and sparkly and very sheer. So compared to the other one, you can again see the textural difference going on here. The way that it picks up and then smoothed out. The ones that are more of their like typical formula, I feel like they do tend to be a little bit more opaque than some of the other formulas, but correct me if I'm wrong. Again, I'm not completely familiar with the entire spectrum of their eyeshadow formulas because I do have like what I have here, but they literally have hundreds and hundreds of single eyeshadow color options. Next up, let's get into Clionadh, and I'm just gonna be starting in nowhere particular. So I have these by collection for the I have these by formula. For the most part, they're a little bit more scattered in some of the other MD palettes, but we already talked about the black base multichromes, so they also have the glitter multichromes. Now, I feel like a lot of people get that formula confused and they think there's actually glitter particles in there, but there isn't. It just means they have a little bit more texture, a little bit more sparkliness to them. Though I feel like, honestly, the level of flakiness and the level of sparkle varies a little bit from shade to shade within that specific collection. So again, you can already kind of tell from the way they look in the pan which ones have a little bit more texture to them and which don't. So something like this, which actually just fell out before I started filming this video, so I tried to press it in, but this one is a very, very smooth, dry kind of shade. And then in comparison to like this one, which has a bit more substance and texture to it, obviously it's a little bit more opaque as well. And then Chill also has a little bit more texture to it. There's also the glitter type multichromes, which I feel like are more or less just the glitter multichromes, and they do also pick up a little bit piecier. So here's a zoom in to show you the glitter and glitter type multichrome finish. They do feel a little dry, though some of them feel like maybe a little bit like thicker. Especially this one I would say feels kind of like the driest, doesn't really have like a silkiness to it or anything like that. It just feels like a dry eyeshadow. So the glitter formula does tend to be just quite shiny because of the texture. So they're definitely for those extra sparkle lovers. I'm just gonna smooth these. Oops, I just accidentally mixed that one. And then last up is this one, Sunbeam. So you can see how similar but different they are. So I feel like Sunbeam doesn't quite fit in here. And these do pick up really great with a brush, even though they have that little bit of texture to them. Definitely recommend a glitter primer if you have hooded lids and you want to ensure that there's no fallout throughout the day. Next, we have some iridescent shades. Again, definitely some varying textures in here. There's some smoother ones, there's some sparklier ones, there's some flakier ones. So for example, here is Luxe. And this one picks up a little bit thicker on the finger, so there's a little bit extra, but it is not necessarily like flaky compared to Gilding. Gilding is very, very flaky. Do you see how that picked up in comparison? And then Ray picks up very, very smooth. And they also have the Series 1 iridescents, which they're very, very satin-like. And that's this one. You can see the powder. So very smooth, but very, very powdery. And these just leave very much like a sheen. And then this one is definitely quite a bit metallic. This one is got quite a bit of sparkle to it. And so does, I would say this one's actually very smooth and shiny. Maybe a little bit of sparkly, but this one is the sparkliest. Then we have the electric multichromes, which I absolutely love this formula. Very, very smooth, very shiny, reflective, super easy to apply with a brush. Truly an ideal kind of eyeshadow to apply with a brush. Very smooth, picks up really nicely and evenly on a brush. And then right here I have the jeweled lights, so they're also very, very smooth. So I'm just going to kind of show you in comparison. I'm not sure why there's a little bit of a green piece right here, but very smooth looking. I feel like if anything, the electrics are a little bit more maybe powdery to pick up versus these, but I'm not sure if that's the case for necessarily all the shades. And then we have the Dimensional, are one of their newest formulas, right next to the Jeweled Lights, and these have two different textures. So they're either very, very flaky and very piecey, super beautiful, they have lots of flex throughout them, or they're a little bit smoother. So for example, the shade Redox, and I do have a dedicated video where I talked about the difference between the textures and I show them swatched out and compared as well. So you can get an idea here on the difference. I feel like this is not really translating the way that it looks like. For example, this is a Dimensional, and then here is an electric multichrome. So you can see in the pan quite a bit difference. So definitely more shiny and sparkly. Still shiny, but again, doesn't have that texture to it. So let me just smooth these out so you can get an idea what they look like. But they still feel smooth, but they definitely can be a little bit messy, the Dimensionals. But not all the Dimensionals, there's the two shades that are not like that. But look at all these, so beautiful. I think you can tell this one's a little bit extra kind of sparkly, and I think it's just because it has so many silver flecks throughout it. Again, not glitter, but just kind of like extra little oomph of sparkle. Then there's also other collections, and I would say generally speaking, the rest of the collections are quite smooth. So more like the electric multichromes versus any of the other textures. So I'm just gonna randomly like kind of like swatch just some shades between all the different formulas here. And you can see how smooth and shiny they are. So not necessarily sparkly, but very smooth, very, very beautiful. Slightly different levels of shine maybe, but very smooth. I'm just gonna smooth them out. This one is the deep iridescent. I absolutely love those so much. So if you prefer your shadows smoother, I would really recommend majority of the different formulas from Clionadh, with exception of some of the iridescent multichromes that are a little bit flakier, and the dimensionals and the glitter formula, but the rest of them are very, very smooth. And last up is Touch of Glam Beauty. And there's, again, quite a bit of different textures going on. I think it's really based on collection. So they do have this collection that launched with more kind of like almost iridescent, kind of pastel multichromes, so those are very, very smooth. Then they have some that are a little bit more textured. I think this one will be kind of similar to the dimensionals from Clionadh. And then they also have the Color Me Multis, which is all of these. I did repan mine. I have some other shades from them that are kind of below here, but you can just see how textured these are. These are pretty flaky. And they do feel a little bit thick. So this one actually, of course, this one picked up very, very smooth. And that could be because I repressed it. So let me grab one of these other shades that is in their original square packaging. I feel like this one looks pretty flaky. So you can already kind of see how it's like picking up a little flake. There we go. You can see how flaky they are. So this is one of those that I would probably not recommend really using with a finger. Though this one right here doesn't seem as flaky. So they kind of vary a little bit on how they pick up, I feel like, because this one is also pretty flaky. You can kind of see how it picked up, but they do smooth out, and they are very, very, very metallic, very shiny, and very shifty. So I think their main formula is like really, really, really smooth, a little bit flakier, a little bit chunkier, and then really like the flakiest and the chunkiest. And then also the unnamed collection has some really beautiful, smooth formulas in there. I mean, these are just so beautiful, but I do think some of them are a little bit less shiny. So it kind of really varies depending on the shade, but for the most part, they have plenty to choose from in terms of some flaky shades, but also some smoother shades, which I do love to see when brands come out with different formulas, so that you really get to kind of pick and choose what your favorite is. So here's a close-up of these, very, very smooth. And then here's a little bit more of the other textural shades. And this one does smooth out very nicely, but again, has lots of flex throughout it. That's why I'm kind of equating it a little bit more towards the dimensionals from Clionadh. And then this one's very, very smooth. And then I've ran out of fingers, clean fingers, to smooth out the last one. But this one definitely feels a little bit like it has a little bit of extra grip to it when you smooth it out. So it feels a little bit kind of like waxier. And this one, I would say definitely make sure you're using the least amount possible, because it can look a little bit thick on the lid, thus accentuating skin texture. So I've kind of separated these into different textures. So these being very smooth, some varying levels of shine, but at the base level, very smooth. So some of them are still a little bit satin, some of them are a little bit shinier. Then we have the kind of sparkle, slightly piecey texture, still very smooth, a little bit on the drier side. And then here we're getting a little bit flakier. So these have a little bit of extra oomph to them, a little bit of extra texture. Then we're heading into a little bit more of a texture territory. I'm actually gonna move this one over. I feel like this one actually kind of smooths a little bit more, but you can really see the way you're looking at them in the pans, just like how different the textures look. And then these, I would say, are kind of the flakiest. So these two are actually both from Terra. So I think I'm just gonna keep one of them in there. I don't think we need all of these. So these are kind of the flakiest. So I'm gonna swatch one of each so you can get an idea. So not really choosing a specific brand. So this is the shiny and very smooth. This is the slightly sparklier, but still very smooth, but a little bit drier. You can kind of see it picks up a little bit differently. And then we have the slightly more textured. I think I'm going to pick up this one from Terra Moons. Chunkier here, so I'm going to pick up this one. I believe it is from Davina. And then lastly would be like the flaky one. So this one is also from Terra Moons. So here's the different textures right here. This one actually should belong here, but I ran out of fingers to swatch these on. So smoothest to chunkiest. I definitely picked up way too much of that one. but you can kind of see the differences. This one definitely remains the smoothest out of them all. Well, this one you can start to see a little bit more of a texture even though it is smoothed out. But again, I put on maybe a little bit extra. You can actually kind of see it over here. This like a little bit of it extra, so it like swatches even more. I have even more there left, but here you can really see the flakiness. And so that's everything for this video. I hope that it was helpful in giving you an idea on just the different kind of single eyeshadow textures that are out there. It really is a spectrum and it really depends on what you like and what you prefer to use. I do think people definitely have their preferences, and mine do vary from day to day. Sometimes I just want something really smooth and easy, just quick to apply, no hassle, and sometimes I really want extra sparkle, and so I will reach for something a little bit chunkier, something a little bit more flaky or piecey that will give me that extra sparkle. And let me know in the comments below what kind of formula you prefer. I would love to hear your thoughts. And that's everything for this video. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to give it a thumbs up. And if you love indie makeup, shiny, shifty, sparkly eyeshadow content, definitely consider subscribing because there is so much content uploading my channel and much more to come. You don't want to miss out. So thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you next time. Bye from me and my stained fingers.